lost his childhood, that is, Catholic faith, while in secondary school, he was now battling with a dark, even suicidal pessimism, nourished in part by a turn to Schopenhauer. But during the war's brief first month, first month, he had chanced upon a German translation of Leo Tolstoy's Gospel in Brief. His take, that is, on the four Gospels. His prayers. An entry from April 29, 1916 reads, make scientifically testable assertions about what is the case in the world. Now, all this may seem strange, given that Wittgenstein's diaries were at points expressing religious sensibility. But Wittgenstein clearly did not mean to deny altogether Vienna, and while engaged in activities that include unsatisfying interactions with the Vienna Circle, he began to realize that there was to understand what is going on in language, therefore, you must focus on specific cases. You must look and see. With the third point, we come to grammar, what we need to further Christological inquiry later. Here, too, the language game comparison is at the heart of things. Language resembles games in that it proceeds according to rules. The rules of games may be, of course, more or less exact. Someone may say, a comma here, always. Or, stand where? Oh, roughly over there. The rules may also develop over time, whether by added detail or substantive alteration. In every case, though, such rules shape activity. And the point at which puzzles appear is when the rules, our understanding of them, somehow fall short. After noting that our grammar may lack perspicuity, a philosophical problem has this form: I don't know my way about. Properly, in other words, philosophy addresses puzzles with practical import. The point is to expose and address blunders that impair functioning, whether of thought or action. How does all this bear on Christology? Consider a much quoted remark earlier alluded to from the philosophical investigations. Grammar tells what kind of object anything is. Theology as grammar. Wittgenstein, it seems, takes his discussion of grammar to shed light on theological reflection. For him, theology is like philosophy. In addressing, say, the grammar of Christ, it aims, ideally, for clarity as to our way about in the form of life over which Christ presides. Theology is thus like philosophy in offering reminders for a particular purpose. For Christians, of course, that purpose is faithfulness to the one who calls us into faithful existence in both thought and activity. Now, brief remarks can only foreshadow the Christological perspective all this may suggest. Yet, a glimpse into Wittgenstein's own thinking, he was drawn to Jesus, if never an Orthodox believer, is here pertinent. A person can call Jesus, I'm quoting Wittgenstein, can call Jesus Lord only if that person lives completely different. Noting that Jesus dead and decomposed would leave us still orphaned and alone, he says that truly significant faith addresses my heart, my soul, not my speculative intelligence. Then perhaps we can say only love can believe the resurrection. Redeeming love believes even in the resurrection, holds fast even to the resurrection. What combats doubt is, as it were, redemption. What first stands out here is the moral difference Christ must make. The second is the sidelining of speculative intelligence. The third is the idea that true faith, so far from being the endpoint of an empirical argument, is somehow a gift, a bestowal from the realm of the mystical. And all this is enough to indicate, if not fully developed, the two themes that I said my own Christological reflection would take. One, oddly but nevertheless widely overlooked, is the connection between Christ and covenant commitments, between, that is, God's grace and our discipleship. Any Christology that pays little heed to this runs afoul not only of Scripture, but also of Wittgenstein's point that both philosophy and theology address the issue of grammar, or the rules we think and live by. Thus, theology disqualifies itself from being authentically theological unless it clarifies our way about. For Christians, this must mean specifically our way about the Christian form of life. The second theme concerns the creedal outlook itself. The first great controversy in Christianity's early centuries was Christological. A major step toward its resolution occurred under the influence not only of theologians, but also of Constantine, who was the emperor of Rome. In a bid to secure unity of thought in his domain, he convened a general church council at Nicaea in 325. In 325, from which came the famous Nicene Creed. Yet disunity persisted. The best known next step, with its still influential outcome, occurred at Chalcedon in 451. Nicaea had said that Jesus Christ is of the, quote, same substance, unquote, as the Father. The Chalcedonian Creed declared him at once fully human and fully divine. Here are four famous adverbs. His two natures united unconfusedly, unalterably, undividedly, inseparably, in one hypostasis or self-identical person. By Wittgensteinian lights, all this and the conversation behind it was a torrent of incomprehensible speculation. Effort to conceive the precise essence of Christ's being, an effort nowhere evident in the New Testament, produced claims that could have, on his terms, no propositional significance. They could not follow from scientific investigation. We have seen that, however, that Wittgenstein allows for metaphysical perspective or assumptions such as may undergird religious or ethical conviction. But that perspective shows itself is mystical. And to understand its meaning, you look and see how language is actually used and what its practical import actually is. Looking for a single concept's essence, for example, the concept of Christ being, looking for a concept's single essence is misguided. I close with a striking fact. J.N.D. Kelly's early Christian doctrine offers a classic history of the Christological controversy. The book is nearly 500 pages long and contains a detailed index with entries for the controversy's main concepts, arguments, and interlocutors. There is no index entry for any of the following: covenant, discipleship, empire, ethics, justice, morality, obedience, peace, or violence. Now, the conversation, judging by Kelly at least, must have largely overlooked the point that Wittgenstein took to be crucial in philosophical or theological discussion. I don't know my way about. Church leaders were too blinkered, too caught up in speculative doctrinal fussiness to notice his oversight, let alone ask whether their teaching should, in fact, satisfy imperial preference. And long after Chalcedon, Christological disagreement, some of it lethal, continued to disfigure the church's life. One final remark. Based on all of the above, the following obtains. Insofar as the doctrine of Christ reflects 4th or 5th century creedal orthodoxy, Wittgenstein's account of language and philosophy compels fresh consideration of it, as it compels fresh consideration of doctrine in general. Wittgenstein states, perhaps overstates, a legitimate concern when he opines. I believe that one of the things Christianity says is that sound doctrines are useless. Christianity says that you have to change your life or the direction of it. Christian thinkers, I am arguing, must contend with this concern. Thanks.
Some of you all's names I don't know, but I have one first and then here. Okay. And always included ways your thoughts, and we're honored to always have you share your wisdom with us. It's also a joy to hear a presentation on Wittgenstein. I love Wittgenstein. His later work was very influential on my life, so thank you for using him to sort of articulate a better understanding of theology, the possibility of a better approach to doctrine, and how we understand these things. So I have less of a question and more of a comment on something he wrote that goes along with what you're saying. I want to see how you feel about it. It doesn't contradict. It's obviously it's going to add to what you're saying. But in a book called Recollections of Wittgenstein, he wrote to a gentleman called M.C. Drury, and he writes this: "Your religious ideas have always seemed to me more Greek than biblical, whereas my thoughts are 100% Hebraic." So now I'm thinking of your presentation, of Abby Newcomb's presentation. So I wonder how would you understand his critique of not only what we did with Christology, the early stages of Christianity today, but what a Hebraic and biblical.
Well, I identify with it. I mean, I was talking to Abby today, and it stunned me. My wife and I, during a period when we have to be at home, we've been attending by online services at the Central Synagogue. It's a Reformed synagogue in New York City, and I love all the staff there. They're so fantastic. But one of the things that strikes you if you go to that service as a Christian is that the sensibility is through and through moral and ethical. If you attend garden variety, popular Christian, maybe fundamentalist churches, there is a preoccupation with correct belief, but also, and perhaps more egregiously, a complete obsession with heaven. Now, Christianity offers us hope. It offers us hope in the face of death. But there is nothing about the Hebraic outlook that fits in with a preoccupation with heaven. Which preoccupation, by the way, if you want to kind of get firsthand experience of it, all you have to do is sign on to a YouTube singing session by either the Voice of Prophecy Homecoming, which you can find many of those on the YouTube, or sign into something, Bill Gaither's songs. It's all about something yet to come. They reduce existence on this earth to the experience of being at a bus stop. You're here, and the real action you're waiting for. But that is completely at odds with that kind of. And so I assume I take Wittgenstein to be support for what I have told myself, and wish we could all tell each other more and more, and that is Christianity would perhaps reverse its current decline in the estimate of the secular world if it became more Jewish. That's all I'm happy.
Yeah. Matt Burdett, fellow Christian. You won't be shocked to know that I didn't resonate with the conclusions that you drew, but what strikes me is, I think, a point of kind of quibbling historically. I would say that actually, for the majority of Christian history, the form of life that the church has taken has been primarily defined liturgically. And that when we think about the history of the Christological controversies, they really were, in fact, more about setting down grammatical rules to do with the worship and preaching of the church, and far less to do with metaphysical speculation. And so, I mean, so part of it is sort of an objection to one of the premises in the paper, but I actually think that that's not insignificant. And I think that when we think about the Christian form of life, including as it works itself out into its ethical form publicly, I don't think that we can abstract it from the church's life of worship. And what we have are 3 centuries of people worshiping Jesus and puzzling over what it means to worship a person who was born and crucified and rose again. And however much we might want to take issue with the role of the empire for appropriation of certain philosophical categories, and like largely those categories were reformed and kind of invented at Nicaea. I mean, it's not as though consubstantial is exactly a word that's floating around in ancient Near East. It seems to me as though actually I can see, of course, how there's a kind of metaphysical speculation that can become an end in itself, and I share with you an objection to treating it as a speculative end in itself that isn't accountable to other things. At the same time, I think there's a kind of cruelty that's potentially there if we refuse to think metaphysically about things being punished.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, I think the fact that Wittgenstein spoke about the premises that underlie these experiences of God, and that Wittgenstein can be, although it's popular to think of him as, think of something called Wittgensteinian fideism, it's not defensible. And it suggests we can have these conversations. But it seems to me that the mistake that is made is that of trying to arrive at the essence of what it means for Christ to be Christ, when in fact ordinary language as manifested in the New Testament has no interest in that essence. In one breath, Jesus is saying, "Why do you call me good? Only God is good." A strange thing to say. Or there's no record of the Father in heaven praying to Jesus. But then there are these very high Christological moments, like in the first chapter of John. And I think the thing that I really want to say, because is this, that a preoccupation with the essence of particular doctrines constitutes a distraction from the point, which is that you change your life. Now, Wittgenstein, as far as I know, does not talk about worship. He's never a member of a worshiping community. And I would just like to say that I do agree that the liturgical aspect of our experience of Christ is crucially important. The debate that goes on, what's important for me, and I think you would agree with me on this, is that the debate about doctrine, such as it makes sense, and it does make some sense, I studied systematic theology, is a debate about premises for practice. The debate is secondary. It doesn't matter, except as it shows us the way to be. It doesn't matter, except as it undergirds the practice of discipleship. That's kind of what I'm saying. And I don't mean to draw a so sharp a distinction
No,
that
I think that that's really helpful. I would actually just say, like, not to keep going back and forth. I think that that is like a basic difference. And I would say that the true end of the Christian life and the Christian community is the worship of God. I would not say the ethical practices are.
yeah, well, there we would differ.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I go back to I'll be my Hebraic self and go back to Genesis 12, where the promise that is made to Abraham is precisely the promise that Abraham, the seed, he would, and his seed would be a blessing to all the families of the earth. I mean, from day one, it's about how a community faithful to God can serve human need. And I think worship is absolutely crucial, but I think that worship is not an end in and of itself.
So we have 10 minutes and currently 4 answers. There.
Chuck, thank you for going into Wittgenstein as much as you did. That is not an example of your paper, and I am a lot of and wonderful insight. I noticed that you quote him as talking about the stuff that comes out of Chalcedon, et cetera, as incomprehensible speculation.
No, that was me I put those words into his mouth.
I'm
Yeah,
putting
but I
you-
think
no, no.
I'm guessing that.
In what you described, no, I tend to agree with that. But it's interesting to me that in your fine paper, it's only about page 4 or 5 or 6 that the word Jesus, the name Jesus, comes up, and that's where you have Wittgenstein refer to Jesus. And it made me think of at my Sabbath school class at Loma Linda that I've been with for years. We had James M. Robinson come from Claremont once, who talked about himself being in the ditches doing the dirt work or the popularizers of Jesus. And that leads me to this question. Why is it that your paper has one word with an exclamation point, Christ, rather than Jesus?
Well, I think because that's a good question, except that I suppose I put Christ in there because I was thinking about the doctrine of Christ. We, as Christians, we admire, in the end, like Thomas, confess our faith in Jesus. But in the theological tradition, Christ is, of course, a title. It means Messiah. But it has come to be something between a title and a name. And in the tradition of doctrinal reflection, we just say Christ. I put the exclamation point behind it just to underscore what I hope is always central in my thinking, namely that Christ is, I'll use the title of Bonhoeffer's book, Christ is the center for me. And the exclamation point, it's just honestly a whim. I thought, oh, what the heck? Then I had a friend who read it almost like, oh, that almost sounds like it's an expostulation that might not be exactly proper in mixed company. Now, I didn't mean it that way, but I meant to underscore the centrality of Christ. So I took I'm looking at the doctrine that is at the center for the community's life. Of all the doctrines, it's at the center. And that's what.
But what's ironic a little bit is that you're emphasizing ethics, and you don't emphasize the name Jesus, whereas you're down on all of this. And
Yeah, I'm not sure what the difference is. I mean, the bone I have to pick with speculation is the preoccupation with speculation. Now, I will end up. I'll probably, what is Christology about? This is not me, not original with me, but I think Christology is about these kinds of things. how is it that we can actually address Jesus as Lord? What justifies that? Or can I address Jesus as Lord and still be a monotheist? That's the second question. Or, question 3, how Christ-like am I called to be? I think the answer to those questions probably will involve metaphysical premises, for sure. But what I'm arguing is that we ought to answer them in a way that does not trap us into constant repetition of severe paradoxes that distract our attention from what really matters, which is what these paradoxes are for. And they're for the very purpose that came to expression when God told Abraham, your seed will be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Something like that.
Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, I will look forward through some of the prefatory remarks. I am interested in how the concept of development is questions. But as somebody who works on Wittgenstein, and I'm supposed to only read Wittgenstein, I am intrigued by some of the population. And perhaps one isn't how these statements are putting it to shape the question. So I take it and most other things to be legitimately questioning the philosophical task.
Questioning the task, okay.
So he's asking questions about the task of what, and our read of what we have will change somewhat depending on our approach to his own skepticism about the capacity of one himself to do the things that we usually see. So I'm not going to ask whether or not the speculations that you are engaging in humans grammar of consent.
Humans which?
Cardinal humans grammar of consent.
Okay.
Which is taken to be part of what the relationship has become. Particularly when we get to what some of the Christian the Christian standpoint from how might some of the ways that Wittgenstein does this separately by explicit content, think about the challenges of knowing anything in language. How might Wittgenstein's way of thinking about the limitations of language maybe cause us to think differently about what grammar is and what we can do? Because I'm thinking he might take a slightly more robustly nuanced approach to grammar itself.
I am not going to claim to know for sure how to answer your question, except to say this, that Wittgenstein is attacking the idea, well, he's attacking the Cartesian self, or the sense that we can, as it were, see, absent any reliance on authority or any reliance on convention, see the way the world really is. I think in some sense, what he's telling us is, there is no place to begin except in the language that human beings actually use. In the ordinary discourse, that's where your starting point is. There's no way to get past it or beyond it or underneath it. And if you do that, then shed light that could help us to overcome long ingrained mistakes. I don't think he's saying that I'm sure he's not saying that he knows a lot of stuff. He's saying, I'm engaged in the activity of seeing what our ordinary language is like and trying to infer from that study how to better our human existence. I think he was ethical through and through. I'm not sure that's a great, it's a puzzle. And when I said in the beginning that there are lots of interpretive puzzles, I'm not posing, and by the way, and I won't be posing as an expert on Wittgenstein. I'm posing as someone who I hope, can competently, as it were, capitalize on Wittgenstein's insights as a way of shedding corrective light on Christian discourse. And I should say it has vast implications for what they're teaching at the seminary or anywhere else. I mean, it's a tricky business, but doctrines are not worth fighting over. You can't show that they illuminate the way to go. So to take an obvious one now, and I remember that for some reason I didn't have a struggle with this when I was in seminary. There were people there who were waking me up, and if there's anything dumber in God's universe than worrying over how old the earth is, I don't know what it is, because the age of the earth has no bearing on the way to be, none. And you take every doctrine. And that, for me, is the litmus test, because we're asked to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. And if we can't show that our doctrines constitute premises for the practice of blessing all the families of the earth, we shouldn't be bothered with them anymore. They're distractions.
Sadly, that's not a bad note to end on.
Hmm.
We've run out of time, so
Hmm.
Okay,
let's
thank you.
take this